Marty Kane was the kind of man who could pick a fight with a doorframe and still lose. The world around him had already given up years ago, but Marty never got the memo. On this particular night he was drunk enough to mistake his own reflection in the bar mirror for a stranger who owed him money, and drunk enough to throw a punch that knocked over 3 stools, spilled a pitcher of beer, and sent a couple on a date running for the exit. The bartender yelled at him to get out, the jukebox fizzed as if it too had had enough, and Marty, swaying like a tree in a storm, grinned with the confidence only the drunk and the doomed ever carried. That was when the wrong car pulled up outside, and Marty, seeing headlights through the haze, stumbled out of the bar thinking it was a cab that would take him home. Instead it took him to the stars, and the galaxy would never laugh at Earth the same way again. The last bar Marty remembered on Earth smelled of sweat, fried onions, and regret. His boots stuck to the floor as he staggered toward the exit. Nobody noticed him leave because by now he was a permanent fixture of the place, as forgettable as the crack in the jukebox glass. The vehicle waiting outside hummed low and strange, but Marty didn't care. He opened the door with the triumphant effort of a man who thought he had just summoned a taxi and collapsed into the seat. He muttered an address that didn't exist, some half-slurred number on a street he had been evicted from long ago, and before he could complain about the lack of a seatbelt the world folded in on itself. When he woke, his mouth was dry as paper and the light stabbed at his eyes like a cruel bartender's joke. The sound of cheering hit him next. Marty blinked, sat up, and realized he was in a cage that looked more like a wrestling ring than anything legal. He turned his head and saw creatures with too many eyes, faces split by mandibles, and robes stitched with silver threads. They roared with laughter, their voices echoing in dozens of languages that still sounded like insults. Above them, towering and gleaming, sat the crime lords of half the galaxy. They had gathered for sport, for entertainment, for blood. A booming voice shook the arena, announcing him in a tongue he couldn't understand. Then, like bad subtitles appearing in his brain, the words rearranged themselves. Presenting for your amusement, the champion of Earth, the drunk ape. The crowd erupted in mocking cheers, throwing glowing coins and cups toward the cage. Marty belched and rubbed his forehead, squinting at the bars around him. He didn't know where he was or what day it was. He just wanted a drink. The first opponent entered the arena. It was a nightmare beast twice his size, plated in armor that seemed to grow straight from its flesh. Its claws scraped the ground with a sound that rattled teeth. Marty staggered to his feet and raised his fists the way he had back when he was a boxer, though the stance was crooked, sloppy, and leaning heavily on one side. The beast snarled, the audience leaned forward, and Marty hiccuped loud enough to make the closest microphone crackle. The fight began with a horn blast. The beast charged. Marty tried to step aside but tripped on his own bootlace, falling forward in a clumsy roll that looked like a drunken somersault. His elbows slammed into a loose panel on the arena floor, releasing a burst of sparks and a hidden trapdoor. The beast, mid-leap, crashed straight into the pit, impaled on a nest of spikes designed to make a cleaner show. The crowd gasped. Marty sat up, dizzy, staring at the hole where his opponent had been. The scoreboard above the arena flickered to life. A number appeared. 1 kill. The audience fell silent for a moment, then roared with laughter and disbelief. The drunk ape had survived. Marty blinked up at the flashing number and muttered something about how he could really use another whiskey. The crime lords leaned forward in their seats. Their eyes glittered with curiosity. What they had expected to be a quick death, a joke at Earth's expense, had turned into something else. A drunk man who had killed one of their prized gladiators without even realizing it. Some laughed harder, thinking it luck. Others whispered in fear, wondering if luck was just another word for something darker. Marty, meanwhile, crawled back to his feet and dusted himself off. He thought he had just fainted in the middle of the bar fight back home and was having some kind of fever dream. He raised his hands to the crowd as if to demand a drink, and the audience, thinking it was a taunt, howled with delight. More challengers were lined up. The bookkeepers began recording. The legend of his kill count had just begun. The second challenger came within minutes. A beast with fangs as long as Marty's forearm and a roar that shook the metal beams of the arena. Marty wobbled forward, fists raised like a parody of a boxer. The creature lunged and Marty, in his desperation to steady himself, grabbed a loose metal cup thrown into the cage by one of the jeering spectators. He hurled it clumsily at the creature, intending nothing more than to buy a second of space. The cup hit a switch embedded in the wall, releasing a burst of plasma that incinerated the beast in an instant. The crowd erupted again, disbelief turning into a roar that shook the stadium. 2 kills. Marty stared at the ashes, his jaw slack. He didn't know how he was still alive. He muttered to himself that maybe this was hell and he just hadn't realized it yet. The scoreboard flickered again. 2. The crowd chanted. Drunk ape. Drunk ape. Drunk ape. From the royal balcony, the crime lords exchanged uneasy glances. They had paraded humans before for sport, but none had lasted more than seconds. This one had racked up 2 kills by accident, or by something that looked like fate. A rumor began to spread among the lower gangs in the stands. Maybe Earth-bred killers who hid behind drunken foolishness. Maybe the drunk was a mask, and the ape was a devil. Marty bent down, scooped up the glowing cup he had thrown, and sniffed it. It wasn't whiskey. He dropped it with a sigh, muttering that this was the worst dream he had ever had. The announcer's voice thundered again, promising more blood, more spectacle, more deaths. And somewhere in the audience, among the laughter and fear, the first whispers began. This human was not a joke. This human was a problem. The roar of the crowd still echoed in Marty's ears long after the second beast had turned to dust. He stood in the cage, swaying, eyes half shut, wondering when the bartender would finally hand him a refill. Somewhere deep in his fogged mind he thought maybe this was still the bar back home, and he had just picked the wrong night to get blackout drunk. The announcer boomed words he couldn't understand until the strange translator in his head caught up. The drunk ape of Earth will fight again. The audience laughed, coins rattled against the cage, and the scoreboard glowed like a neon sign announcing his rising legend. Marty rubbed his forehead and muttered about hangovers, oblivious to the fact that half the galaxy was now watching him like he was both miracle and monster. The third challenger was even bigger than the last, a lumbering reptilian brute with teeth lined in rows like saw blades. Marty saw it step into the cage and let out a groan that sounded more like a man who had spotted a bill collector than a predator. He staggered to the side, looking for an exit that didn't exist. The brute charged with terrifying speed, claws raised high. Marty slipped on a puddle of alien blood left behind, fell backward with a crash, and in his wild scramble grabbed a loose cable hanging from the arena wall. Sparks flew. The cable whipped out like a striking snake and wrapped around the brute's throat, sizzling as it cut through flesh. By the time Marty crawled back to his feet, the monster was twitching on the ground, dead before it even knew what had happened. The crowd gasped again, and then erupted with howls of disbelief. The scoreboard blinked. 3. Marty blinked down at the corpse and shook his head. He muttered that maybe he should quit drinking if this was what hangovers felt like. Then he changed his mind immediately, and asked out loud for something strong on the rocks. The crowd cheered louder, mistaking his plea for another taunt. From their golden balcony, the crime lords leaned forward. Some sneered, some laughed, and some grew silent, calculating. Earth's drunk was becoming a phenomenon none of them had expected. Backstage, while Marty slumped against the bars awaiting the next fight, 2 syndicate bosses hissed arguments at one another. One claimed the human was just lucky, a stumbling fool who would fall soon enough. The other warned that luck did not kill 3 gladiators in a row without lifting a blade. The whispers grew into rumors. Perhaps humans were not weak creatures at all. Perhaps this one was proof that Earth had bred something dangerous. The audience meanwhile screamed for blood, coins and cups flying through the air as wagers doubled and tripled. When the next fight was delayed, Marty nearly nodded off against the cage. That was when he met Jorvik the Slim. The alien slithered up to the bars, tall and wiry with a grin full of sharp teeth. He spoke in broken human tongue, clearly practiced for manipulation. "Earthman," he said, "you kill like devil? You want freedom, I can help." Marty squinted at him, trying to focus. Freedom sounded nice, but so did another drink. He told Jorvik he would only consider it if it came with whiskey. Jorvik laughed, promising him oceans of it, though his eyes flickered with greed. Marty's kill count rose again that night. He barely remembered how. One moment he was standing in the arena trying to argue with his own reflection on the polished floor panel, and the next the body of another alien challenger lay broken at his feet. His kill number flashed 4. The crime lords who had once mocked him now whispered urgently among themselves. What had begun as a joke at Earth's expense was becoming a dangerous story that threatened to grow into legend. Some ordered their assassins to prepare. Others thought it wiser to buy him, to use him as their weapon. Among the slaves who scrubbed the arena floor and served drinks to the syndicate bosses, another set of whispers began. They had seen the human stumble and fall, and yet every fall ended in blood. They had seen him hiccup, and it toppled a monster. They began to wonder if fate itself bent around him. To them he was no fool but a symbol, proof that even the lowest could rise. Zelra, a medic forced to patch up wounded fighters, watched from the shadows. She saw through the haze of alcohol that his eyes sometimes sharpened in strange moments, soldiers' eyes hidden behind a drunk's mask. The more Marty fought, the less the laughter sounded genuine. The audience still cheered, but underneath was a nervous edge. The bookkeepers raised the odds on his death, only for gamblers to lose fortunes when Marty stumbled into another victory. Every accidental kill made the syndicates more afraid. Every whisper of his name spread further across criminal networks. Earth's drunk ape was not dying. He was thriving. One night, while Marty snored in a holding pen, Zelra slipped inside. She carried a flask of something alien but potent. She pressed it into his hand and whispered that he needed to keep drinking if he wanted to survive. Marty chuckled at the advice and muttered that sobriety had never done him any good anyway. Zelra warned him that the lords would never stop until he was dead or enslaved. Marty looked at her through bleary eyes and said he had been both before, back on Earth. She realized then that his drunken mask was hiding more than he let on. The syndicate leaders held a private council soon after. The human must be tested, one declared. Another argued he should be eliminated quietly. But their assassin never made it to Marty's cage. The killer slipped in silently during the night, knife ready, only to be mistaken by Marty for a bartender carrying drinks. Marty reached out clumsily, asking for a refill, and in the scramble knocked the assassin's head against the bars. One strike turned into another as Marty fumbled for balance, and by the time guards arrived, the assassin lay dead at his feet. The scoreboard outside the cage ticked up again. 5. The audience never learned the details, but the crime lords did, and their laughter finally began to fade. Now whispers across the galaxy carried a new tone. Some said Earth hid its true killers by disguising them as fools. Others claimed alcohol was their weapon, that every drink unleashed powers unseen. Stories spread like fire, and suddenly Earth's reputation shifted. No longer were humans dismissed as weak. They were whispered about as demons, unpredictable and unstoppable. And at the center of it all was Marty Kane, who only wanted another drink and a way home. Zelra returned often, tending his wounds, smuggling him bottles, and warning him of the growing bounty on his head. Marty laughed her off most nights, saying he had already been hunted by worse back on Earth. Yet when she saw his eyes harden for just a second, when she caught the way his hands sometimes steadied like a trained fighter's, she understood that the drunk was not the whole truth. Somewhere beneath the haze was a man with a past that terrified even him. The crime lords tried to laugh again, louder than before, to cover their unease. But behind their grins they sharpened their blades. Marty Kane, Earth's drunk ape, had become a problem they could not ignore. His kill count was rising, his legend spreading, and whether by accident or destiny, he was no longer just entertainment. He was a threat. The galaxy had begun to take him seriously, even if he never took himself seriously at all. The night was restless in the underbelly of the crime lord's floating city. Neon bled through the steel corridors, and whispers of fear rippled through the lower decks. Marty Kane, sprawled out in his cell with a bottle clutched loosely in his hand, snored as if the galaxy's problems did not exist. Outside his bars, however, the syndicates were beginning to panic. The accidental kills had mounted higher than they had ever expected. Each time Marty entered the arena, the crime lords bet on his death, and each time he stumbled out alive, they lost face and credits. They had decided, finally, that he could not be allowed to live much longer. The assassin chosen to deal with him was not just any killer. He was the finest the syndicates could buy, a figure wrapped in shadows, silent as smoke, feared across star systems for eliminating entire gangs in a single night. The assassin slipped into Marty's cell with the efficiency of a machine, his knife glinting under faint light. Marty stirred, his drunken haze thick but not yet asleep. He cracked open an eye and muttered in a slurred voice that he had been waiting for service all night. He thought the assassin was a bartender bringing him another round. When the blade flashed down, Marty flinched sideways, reaching out for the imaginary drink. His hand closed on the assassin's wrist by accident, twisting it with the clumsy power of a man trying to stay upright. The knife dropped to the floor. In the scramble, Marty staggered forward, head colliding with the assassin's chin. The crack echoed, and the killer collapsed in a heap. Marty, still wobbling, tried to shake the assassin awake as though demanding his order. When the body did not move, Marty sighed and mumbled about lousy service. The guards who arrived later found the galaxy's most expensive assassin dead at Marty's feet. The scoreboard ticked upward. The syndicates tried to cover up what happened, but whispers spread faster than they could silence. The legend grew. Earth's drunk had killed the unbeatable shadow killer without lifting a proper weapon. To some, it was proof that Marty was not just lucky but something far more dangerous. The fear began to outweigh the laughter. In the days that followed, stories spread through the lower decks where the slaves and workers lived. They spoke of the drunk who killed without trying, of a man who stumbled yet survived, who tripped but left trails of bodies behind him. They began calling him Earth's Devil, a name spoken with both reverence and dread. For the first time in years, the enslaved felt the spark of hope. If such a fool could defy the crime lords, then maybe their chains were not eternal. Marty, of course, knew none of this. He was too busy searching every corner of his cell for something to drink. Zelra watched him closely. She had tended to his wounds after every fight, and she had seen something no one else had noticed. In fleeting moments when Marty's eyes cleared, there was a sharpness there, the kind of focus only soldiers carried. Once, when she stitched a gash in his arm, his hand moved with startling precision to help her tie the knot. It was not the gesture of a bumbling drunk. It was the muscle memory of a trained killer. She realized then that the alcohol was not the cause of his survival, but the mask he wore to dull whatever darkness lay beneath. One evening, while the crowd still roared in the arena above, Zelra pressed Marty about his past. He tried to laugh it off, saying Earth had nothing worth remembering. She pushed harder, and finally his expression changed. He admitted, in a voice low and quiet, that he had once been a soldier. He did not say where or when, but he confessed that he had seen too much blood. He had been court-martialed after one mission went wrong, and too many innocents had died. He drowned himself in liquor after that, trying to silence the memories. Zelra listened, realizing that the drunk mask was not a joke at all but a shield to protect him from his own guilt. Meanwhile, the syndicates argued about what to do with him. Some still believed he was a fool whose luck would run out. Others feared he was a weapon in disguise. They finally agreed to raise the stakes. They would send not beasts, not gladiators, but their finest trained fighters against him. If he survived, they would unleash their armies. If he died, the legend would end. The announcement was made the next day. The drunk ape would face 10 champions in a single night. Marty barely listened to the announcer. He had his head tilted back, squinting at the bright lights, muttering that the hangover was killing him more than the aliens ever could. When the first champion rushed forward, Marty tried to dodge but tripped over his own foot, falling into a lever that activated a series of traps. Spikes shot up from the ground, skewering 3 fighters at once. Marty scrambled backward, kicking blindly, and sent another into the arena wall where hidden electricity fried him instantly. By the end of the chaos, the scoreboard had jumped again, flashing numbers that made the audience restless. The syndicates watched in disbelief. Every attempt to humiliate or kill him only made him stronger. The fear began to grow into paranoia. Crime lords wondered if Earth had sent Marty on purpose, a secret weapon disguised as a fool. What if there were more like him, waiting back on that blue planet, pretending to be harmless? The galaxy began to talk of Earth differently, not as a backwater world of weaklings, but as a hidden nest of demons. Every crime lord feared that Marty's existence was proof that Earth was not to be mocked but avoided. Zelra used this growing paranoia to plan their escape. She told Marty they could slip away during the chaos of the next fight. He shrugged and said he had nowhere to go. She told him he was becoming more than a joke, that slaves whispered his name, believing he was their chance at freedom. Marty laughed bitterly, saying he was no hero. He was just a drunk who had ruined his life. Zelra looked at him with fierce eyes and told him he had already started a rebellion without meaning to. Whether he wanted it or not, he had become a symbol. That night, as Marty lay back staring at the flickering ceiling light, the noise of the crowd rumbling above, he felt the weight of her words. He had never wanted to lead anyone. He had never wanted to inspire anyone. All he had ever wanted was another drink to drown the ghosts of his past. But now the galaxy was watching him, terrified and fascinated, waiting for his next move. He hiccuped, rolled over, and tried to sleep, but deep down he knew there was no escaping what he had become. By the time morning came, the bounty on his head had tripled. Entire gangs had begun plotting to take him down. The crime lords had stopped laughing. The galaxy now feared him, even though he still feared himself. The drunk mask was slipping, and behind it lay a soldier who had once been deadly even when sober. The thought of what he might become if that soldier ever returned was enough to shake even the most powerful syndicates. Marty Kane had become a problem too large to ignore, and no amount of alcohol could hide him from it any longer. The bounty was announced with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for galactic wars. On every syndicate-controlled planet, holoscreens lit up with the image of Marty Kane, his face captured mid-hiccup in the arena, looking less like a threat and more like a man trying to remember where he left his drink. The announcer's voice boomed that the crime lords had decreed a blood contract. Whoever brought the drunk ape of Earth and dead or alive would earn a fortune greater than most planets' annual revenue. Across the galaxy, hunters sharpened their blades, smugglers loaded their guns, and gangs readied themselves. Marty Kane, who had no idea this was happening, sat in his cell arguing with a metal bucket about why it would not turn into whiskey. The attacks began almost immediately. The first wave of mercenaries ambushed him on his way to the arena, hoping to drag him off before the crowds noticed. Marty, trying to steady himself on the corridor walls, stumbled just as a mercenary fired, causing the bolt to ricochet and strike another attacker. The corridor erupted into chaos. Marty dropped to the floor, fumbling for the bottle Zelra had smuggled him, and as he crawled to retrieve it, mercenaries tripped over his body, knocking each other into a live energy conduit. When the smoke cleared, Marty was still on the ground clutching the bottle, muttering about bad service again. The mercenaries lay dead. The guards who rushed and saw the carnage and shook their heads, adding the tally to his kill count. By now, the whispers had grown into open fear. Entire syndicates debated whether they should continue mocking him or start running from him. Some insisted he was pure luck, a fool blessed by chaos. Others warned that luck was just another name for destiny, and destiny had chosen him to wreak havoc on them all. The audience that once laughed began to watch in silence, the kind of silence that comes when you realize the joke is on you. Marty still thought he was living inside a nightmare dream brought on by cheap liquor, but the galaxy around him was changing. Then came the night he sobered up. The fight was supposed to be a spectacle. They had thrown him into the arena with 3 monstrous champions, each designed to tear him apart slowly while the crowd jeered. Marty stumbled out, already searching his pockets for a drink. When he found nothing, panic flickered across his face. Zelra, watching from the stands, realized what was happening. He had run out of alcohol. For the first time since his capture, Marty Kane was sober. The champions advanced. Marty raised his fists in a boxer's stance, but his hands trembled. His eyes darted, unfocused, not with drunken blur but with fear. He tried to swing, but his punch was weak, a shadow of what it should have been. The crowd leaned forward, sensing the end. Marty tripped, but this time there was no lucky accident, no stumble that saved him. A claw sliced his shoulder, and blood poured. He fell back, gasping, his breath ragged. He was not the unstoppable demon they had feared. He was just a man, broken and haunted. Zelra acted fast. She pushed through the crowd, carrying a flask of smuggled liquor. She threw it into the arena, where it clattered across the floor. Marty saw it, crawled toward it like a dying man grasping at salvation, and drank deep. Within moments, the tremble in his hands eased. His body loosened, his fear dulled. When the next champion lunged, Marty's drunken sway carried him just out of reach. He stumbled into a lever, releasing a set of spinning blades hidden in the arena walls. The blades sliced the creature clean in half. The other two attacked, but Marty fell backward into the corpse, which toppled onto them, pinning them long enough for another trap to spring. The scoreboard ticked upward again, glowing brighter than ever. The crowd erupted, not in laughter but in horror. They had seen the difference. Sober, he was weak. Drunk, he was untouchable. To them, it confirmed the terrifying rumor. Earth's drunks were not fools. They were demons who drew their power from alcohol, and Marty was proof of it. The slaves in the shadows, however, saw something else. They saw hope. If this man could defy the crime lords simply by stumbling and refusing to die, then maybe they too could fight back. The rebellion began quietly. It started with whispers, then small acts of defiance. Guards found their weapons tampered with. Supplies vanished. The slaves began painting Marty's face on walls, crude drawings of the drunk ape with glowing eyes, a symbol of their defiance. Marty himself remained oblivious. He thought the cheering crowds were mocking him louder than before, unaware that half of them were chanting his name as a call to arms. The crime lords met again, this time with rage and panic in their voices. One slammed his fist on the table, declaring that the human had become a plague. Another argued that killing him would only make him a martyr. They were too late. His legend was already beyond their control. Every attempt to silence him only amplified his myth. They had unwittingly sparked something larger than themselves. Zelra finally told Marty the truth. She cornered him in his cell, eyes burning with urgency. She told him that he was the symbol of a rebellion now, that slaves across the galaxy whispered his name, that they were ready to rise if he gave the signal. Marty laughed bitterly, taking another swig from the flask. He told her he was no leader, no hero. He was just a broken man who drank to forget the things he had done. Zelra refused to let him hide. She told him the galaxy did not care about his past, only what he was now. Whether he wanted it or not, he had become their hope. The next day, as he entered the arena again, the rebellion erupted. Slaves rose up across the floating city, attacking guards, setting fires, tearing down banners of the syndicates. The crime lords watched in horror as their empire shook from within. Marty, drunk and stumbling, fought in the arena, but every move he made now carried weight far beyond the sand beneath his feet. Each accidental kill was not just survival. It was fuel for a war he never meant to start. As the city burned, the galaxy began to fracture. Syndicates who had once stood united now turned on each other, blaming one another for letting the drunk ape live. Entire fleets mobilized to hunt him, while others considered siding with the rebellion to protect their own interests. Marty Kane had gone from a joke to a threat to the spark of a galactic war. And all he wanted was another drink. When the fires dimmed that night, Zelra found him sitting in the arena, surrounded by bodies and broken weapons. She told him the truth at last. He was not just drunk. He was the man who had killed hundreds back on Earth during wars no one remembered. She had seen it in his eyes, the soldier beneath the haze. Marty stared at her for a long time, then raised his bottle and muttered that he had never wanted to be remembered for anything. But destiny, or maybe just bad luck, had decided otherwise. The war had begun, and he was its unwilling leader. The floating city had become a battlefield. What was once the jewel of the syndicates now shook with riots, smoke pouring from its towers and alarms screaming in every language. In the chaos, Marty Kane sat on a broken crate clutching a bottle of something that tasted like battery acid mixed with fire, his body swaying as if he were rocking himself to sleep. He did not realize that his face had become the symbol of war across the stars. To him, this was just another night gone sideways. To the galaxy, it was the night the crime lords realized their greatest joke had turned into their worst nightmare. The syndicates could no longer laugh him off. Entire fleets had been gathered, armies trained killers armed to the teeth, all converging on the planet to snuff him out. The crime lords declared their unity, vowing that Earth's drunk ape would not live to see another dawn. But fear threaded their words. They had seen him survive the impossible, and some were no longer sure if even their combined might would be enough. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said bullets bent away from him. Others claimed he drank the blood of his enemies and grew stronger. No two stories matched, but they all carried the same conclusion. Marty Kane could not be killed. When the fleets descended, the city became hell. Explosions tore through the sky as rebels and slaves rose up against their masters. Zelra moved through the chaos like a shadow, rallying fighters, patching wounds, and whispering Marty's name as a battle cry. Marty himself stumbled through streets slick with oil and blood, bottle in one hand, broken stool leg in the other. He fought not with skill but with accident. Every swing that should have missed connected. Every step that should have tripped him carried him clear of death. When a mercenary aimed a plasma rifle at his head, Marty sneezed and bent down at the same instant, the blast vaporizing another attacker instead. His kill count ticked higher, glowing on hacked syndicate screens across the city, turning into a number too large to ignore. The crime lords gathered in their fortress, watching the carnage unfold. Their faces were pale, their laughter long gone. One shouted that they had unleashed a curse, another that they had underestimated fate itself. A few still argued that he was a fool, but their voices trembled. The syndicates finally agreed that this was not about amusement anymore. This was about survival. They ordered every assassin, every bounty hunter, every soldier they owned to converge on Marty Kane and bring back his head. Marty never knew any of this. All he knew was that the liquor in his bottle was almost gone, and every time he reached for another, someone else tried to kill him. The streets turned into a battlefield around him, but he treated it like a drunken bar brawl. He staggered into gunfire, tripped over corpses, swung his stool leg in wild arcs, and somehow left nothing but bodies in his wake. The rebels who fought beside him began to believe he was not human at all. To them, he was a force of nature. They chanted his name even as the enemy pressed harder. When the syndicates finally unleashed their united army, the city shook under the weight of war. Tanks rolled down burning streets, gunships screamed across the skies, and thousands of soldiers swarmed every corner. Marty, surrounded on all sides, stood with a bottle in one hand and a broken blade in the other, swaying under neon light. Zelra begged him to run, but Marty only laughed. He said he had been running his whole life and had no more left in him. He raised his bottle in a sloppy salute to the army before him and hiccuped so loud the nearest soldiers froze. The first wave came hard, hundreds charging with blades and rifles. Marty stumbled forward, tripped, and slammed into a power terminal. The terminal exploded, sending arcs of energy rippling through the air, frying dozens instantly. The explosion sent Marty flying across the street, landing on top of a commander who broke his fall with a scream before going silent forever. Marty rolled off, coughing smoke, and muttered that someone had better pour him another drink. The rebels cheered as the kill count flashed higher, spreading fear through enemy lines. The battle raged for hours. Marty fought with the chaos of a man too drunk to know fear, and every moment turned into another story. When cornered by flamethrowers, he dropped his bottle, which shattered and ignited the ground in a wave of fire that consumed them all. When a sniper took aim, Marty sneezed again, tripping forward, the bullet missing him by an inch and striking a fuel tank that erupted behind the enemy squad. When pressed against the wall, Marty swung blindly, the stool leg breaking through a gas line that exploded outward, burying attackers in rubble. His kill count soared, and the syndicates began to panic. Inside the fortress, the crime lords realized they could not contain him. One suggested retreat, another suggested negotiation, but fear had driven them mad. They poured every resource they had into crushing him. The united front became desperation, and desperation turned into mistakes. Their armies fractured as rebels pushed harder, slaves rallying under the banner of the drunk ape. The galaxy's greatest syndicate city was crumbling because of one man too drunk to realize he was leading a revolution. In the middle of it all, Zelra confronted Marty. She told him the truth he had buried for so long. She told him she knew he was once a soldier, that his drunkenness was not just vice but armor against the memories that haunted him. Marty's grin faltered for the first time. He confessed that he had been the best once, too good, so good it had destroyed him. He said he had sworn never to be that man again, that the bottle was the only way to keep himself from becoming the monster the army had made him. Zelra told him the galaxy already saw him as that monster, but now they needed him to own it. Not to embrace the soldier, not to embrace the drunk, but to be the legend they needed him to be. Marty stared at her for a long time, then raised his bottle. He said he would drink to that. The final assault came with all the fury of the galaxy's underworld. Entire buildings collapsed under bombardment. Fire lit the skies until the stars themselves disappeared. Marty walked into it with a grin, his body swaying, his bottle nearly empty. He fought with bar stools, bottles, broken pipes, anything within reach. He stumbled and tripped, coughed and hiccuped, but every misstep killed another foe. By the time dawn came, his kill count was higher than the entire populations of some planets. The crime lords tried one last desperate strike, sending their personal guards against him, the finest warriors they had bred. Marty stood among the wreckage, hiccuping, when they descended. One after another, they fell, not to skill, not to precision, but to chaos itself. The battlefield was slapstick and slaughter at once, a comedy wrapped in tragedy. By the end, Marty was the only one standing, his bottle finally empty, the scoreboard glowing with a number that made the galaxy shudder. The fortress fell silent. The crime lords were dead, their armies broken, their fleets burning in the sky. Marty sat on a pile of rubble, head in his hands, whispering that he had only wanted a drink. Zelra approached him, telling him he had done more than he would ever understand. He had not just survived. He had destroyed an empire. The rebels were free, the slaves unchained, the galaxy trembling. But all Marty wanted was another bottle. The fires had burned low by the time the last echoes of battle faded. The floating city that once gleamed like a monument to the syndicates now drifted in ruin, its towers collapsed, its fleets scattered, its rulers either dead or fled into the shadows. The rebels moved through the streets cautiously, freeing the remaining slaves and tearing down banners of the old order. In the center of the wreckage sat Marty Kane, hunched on a cracked slab of stone, staring at the remains of a bottle he had drained hours ago. His clothes were singed, his knuckles bloody, but his expression was the same as it had always been, the tired look of a man who had drunk too much and cared too little. To the rebels gathering around him, he was no longer a drunk. He was their savior, their symbol, their proof that the impossible could be toppled. To Marty, he was just thirsty. Zelra approached him carefully, though her heart was still burning with triumph. She told him that the galaxy was watching, that his name was being whispered in every dark corner, that the rebellion had already begun spreading to other syndicate worlds. Marty did not look up. He mumbled that he never asked for any of this, that all he wanted was to crawl into a quiet bar somewhere and be left alone with a bottle. Zelra argued that he could not vanish, that he had started something too big to walk away from. He laughed bitterly, asking her if she thought he was some kind of hero. He was a broken man who had stumbled through life and now through war, leaving corpses behind without meaning to. She answered that it did not matter what he thought of himself. What mattered was what others saw in him, and they saw hope. All across the galaxy, the stories multiplied. On smugglers' ships, in slave camps, in the dens of outlaws, they spoke of the drunk ape from Earth who had brought the crime lords to their knees. Some said he was a god who drank fire. Others said he was a demon who could not die. A few told the story truer, that he was just a man who stumbled his way through battles, but those voices were drowned out by the roar of myth. In time, the details would twist beyond recognition, but the fear remained. The syndicates who survived scattered into hiding, their empires crumbling, their soldiers deserting. The rebellion spread like fire, and wherever the flames caught, the name of Marty Kane was carried like a banner. Marty himself wanted nothing to do with it. When the fighting had ended, and the slaves sang of victory, he slipped away into the ruins with Zelra close behind. He muttered that he had done enough damage for one lifetime. He had seen what happened when people believed in him, back when he was a soldier on Earth, and it had ended in blood and shame. He did not want to wear another crown, not even one built on accident. Zelra tried to convince him that this time was different, that the galaxy needed him, but he shook his head. He said he could not live as a legend. He could only live as a drunk. The rebels still searched for him, desperate to raise him on their shoulders, but Marty was already gone. He found a transport ship half buried in rubble, stole a bottle from a distracted smuggler, and vanished into the stars before anyone realized. Zelra stayed behind, her heart torn. She knew he was not meant to lead, not in the way others demanded. She took his place, guiding the rebellion with the knowledge she had gained from watching him. To the people, she became the face of freedom, but the legend of Marty Kane loomed larger, the ghost who had sparked it all. Meanwhile, the surviving crime lords held secret meetings in the shadows of distant worlds. They whispered of rebuilding, of regaining control, but none could speak Marty's name without shuddering. They had seen him stumble through fleets and armies, leaving death behind as if the universe itself bent to his chaos. They told one another that if he still lived, he could rise again. They spread warnings to every corner of their networks. Beware the drunks of Earth, for one of them had killed more than their greatest assassins combined. They lived in constant fear of seeing another human stumble into their territories with a bottle in hand and a grin on his face. For Marty, life did not change. He drifted from one seedy world to another, looking for bars dark enough to forget the galaxy's eyes on him. On one world he was asked if he was the legendary drunk from Earth. He shook his head and claimed he was just another man with too much thirst and too little sense. They laughed, bought him a drink, and the night passed like so many others. But even as he tried to vanish, the whispers followed him. The rebels painted his face on walls. The syndicates cursed his name. He had become both a nightmare and a dream, and there was no going back. One night, far from the ruins of the floating city, Marty sat at the counter of a dive bar on a nameless planet. The place smelled of stale smoke and cheap spirits, and the bartender, a grizzled alien with 3 eyes, asked him who he was. Marty grinned, his eyes half closed, and raised his glass. He said he was just an Earth drunk with one hell of a kill count. The bartender laughed, not sure whether to believe him, and poured another round. Outside, the stars glimmered cold and endless, carrying his legend to every world whether he wanted it or not. The galaxy would tell his story in countless ways. To some, he was a fool who tripped his way into victory. To others, he was a devil wrapped in the skin of a man. To the slaves who fought under his accidental banner, he was the spark of freedom. To the crime lords who once laughed, he was the reason they no longer slept soundly. But to Marty Kane, he was still just the same man who had walked out of a bar on Earth one night, too drunk to know where he was going, and stepped into a cab that carried him to the stars. He had never wanted to be a hero, never wanted to be a legend, and never wanted to be remembered. But legends are not chosen by those who bear them. Legends are chosen by those who need them. And somewhere, on a nameless world in a bar with sticky floors, Marty Kane kept drinking, shaking his head at the madness of it all, and waiting for the next round. The galaxy might remember him forever, but he would spend every day trying to forget. And so the story closed not with the triumph of a conqueror, but with the quiet laughter of a drunk who had killed empires without meaning to. The crime lords had laughed at him once, and the galaxy had laughed with them, but no one was laughing now. Marty Kane had left behind a kill count so high it defied belief, and a legend that would haunt the stars long after the last bottle was empty.